Hello, Val. How are things?
Hi, Dr. Clough. We're good.
That's good to hear. Alrighty, so let's jump into a little bit of a history. If you
Okay.
don't mind, just give us a bit of an idea as to how things sort of led up to the diagnosis of autism and what were some of
Sure.
the sort of experiences that led to that point.
Okay. Rex doesn't have typical regressive autism like most families experience. He seemed to be born with the diagnosis. I don't know. He was vaccinated the day after birth, so I don't know if that came into play. And then I didn't have great gut health, so there's that too. But he had severe sensory issues. As a newborn, he couldn't be in the light, the sunlight. The car rides were unbearable, stroller ride, nothing. And he had to be upright in my arms in the recliner for the first 6 months of his life. He had severe reflux, cried often, stopped breathing multiple times a day. That was pretty scary, and took 4 doctors to help us diagnose the reflux, which was causing that. What else? As a baby, he didn't make eye contact.
Mm,
He didn't smile at us or coo. So, at 3 months old, I knew he wasn't meeting milestones. So I knew that something was off. And I continued to bring him into doctors, but doctors weren't, they just, I don't know, because it's too soon in their practices to diagnose anything. So then I brought him to early intervention. I think he was about 1.5, and they were able to say, yes, we've got some delays. Let's get to work. So we had people come in. You lose those services at 3 years old. So we lost services, but got a diagnosis. He was diagnosed severe autism, level 3, developmental delay, language delay, anxiety, and sensory processing disorder. So that was his official diagnosis. What else? Yeah, that's pretty much how we
And in
figured out.
that, so you got the diagnosis at around 3?
Yes, a month
Okay.
before he turned 3.
Okay. And then in that period between like 15 months to 3, were those therapies, was he proceeding to get some improvements with those therapies or interventions?
I didn't notice any improvements with what was being done, and it was so minimal. The state we live in doesn't offer long amounts of therapy. It was like once a week,
Mm,
and it was maybe for an hour of all combined, like speech, OT, PT. So it wasn't anything. I don't know. I know other states offer more
right,
care.
right. And then was there a period of time or a certain, point where you realize, okay, these interventions aren't really helping me. I'm going to need to look at other therapies. And what was that sort of process like for you?
Definitely. I knew the body was capable of healing. I had studied that before. I knew people who had healed their own cancer. So I knew the body could heal itself. So I started trying to find people who had healed symptoms of autism. And I started to stumble upon parents who had recovered their children, and they'd written books or done certain therapies. So I started Sunrise Therapy. I didn't go take their course, but I met parents who did it and had them help me. I found their manual online and downloaded it. I did everything I could. I even called them. They were so sweet. I'd ask a question and they'd answer me, even though I wasn't a paying client. And I started Sunrise Therapy, and I don't know if you've heard of it, it's the therapy of joining your child in their stims,
Mm,
because you're basically creating trust by joining them in their world, and then hopefully they come into ours.
right.
And Rex's stim at the time was putting his hands underwater. And I sat down next to him and I put my hands under the water with him, and he turned around and looked at me for the very first time ever. And he smiled for the first time ever.
Wow.
And that's the moment I knew he was in there. I knew I could get to him, and I knew that these doctors telling me there was nothing I could do, I knew they were wrong. And it just lit up in me, and I've been unstoppable ever since that evening.
Wow. Wow. And
Yeah.
and that's um well, such a powerful story, but also something so pervasive that I hear all the time, that patients or parents of patients are telling us, yeah, our doctors really don't they tell us there's nothing more that you can do. And if you think within sort of a box, that is very true, because there are no pharmaceuticals that are out there or approved
Yeah.
to address the core symptoms of autism. So there
Yes.
really isn't anything that you can do when you just think with your pharmaceutical hat on. But
Yeah.
outside of the pharmaceutical, there are a lot of things, and
Yeah.
parents are having to find that out on their own and experiment. And I think that's where, other parents are being great advocates, and you've turned into one of those who share
Thanks.
their experiences to others so that they're aware of, okay, here's what the
Yeah.
possibilities are. So that's wow, that's quite a transformation. And so then between that time, so how old would have he have been around that time?
I want to say he was almost 3, because I had
Right,
started looking at interventions even before diagnosis because I
right,
knew what we were dealing with. Um, I met with a MAPS doctor in 2017. I think Rex was 3.5. And he gave us supplements. We ran a bunch of labs. I'd already switched to gluten-free, dairy-free too, casein-free. Rex started to make a little bit of eye contact with that. And then I met with a MAPS doctor and we got on supplements. Supplements were amazing. We had huge improvements the first week even. And we
wow,
were on supplements about 1.5 years, and then his body rejected all of them. So I suspect mast cell activation. I don't know. He threw up one morning, all of his supplements. I didn't give him the next day and he seemed better. So we've been off supplements since then, besides probiotics or antifungals.
right,
Um, and then we started neuroplasticity therapy, and that was our game changer. We never did ABA therapy. We didn't have those services available to us where we live. So we got on board with neuroplasticity therapy, and we had really huge gains there, but they're very hard to get. Like it's a lot of work.
mm,
Before FMT, it was a lot of work to have him be compliant and want to work with you and learn.
right. And how was his, like, were you seeing between supplements and dietary changes and the neuroplasticity work, were you seeing any advancements in like speech or language?
With supplements, we saw a lot of advancements, but like I said, we had to get off supplements. So then he regressed quite a bit. And then our yeast flares became worse. So with the regression, like we lost speech, we lost a lot when we had to stop supplements.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
but
And
then got some of it back with the neuroplasticity.
right, right. And then, so what was the sort of process between that and leading up to FMT? Like, did you have some realization, oh, there seems to be a lot of GI symptoms or a lot of, his improvements when we do therapies that are related to his gut lead to improvements in other areas? Like, what was that sort of discovery process for
So
you like?
we had used a high dose probiotic, and that was one of our favorite go-tos for kind of a detox. And it basically would push the bad bacteria out, and then we would have improvements. And that's when I realized we've got to do something more, I don't know if the word's aggressive, but more aggressive to get this good bacteria in him to stay. And with his severe sensory processing, diet was hard to shift. He has gag reflex really bad, or had until FMT. So I couldn't shift his diet easily. I couldn't, I tried everything with food. It was insane the effort we went to try to get nutrient dense food into him without his gag reflex going off.
Wow.
So I couldn't control or help his gut bugs with food.
Right,
So this just felt like the next route to go to help his body get what it needed.
right. And so, and he was 6 when we started with FMT, correct?
Yeah.
Right. And what were at that point, um, leading up to, the month or year before FMT, what were some of the, really core symptoms that he was dealing with that you were hoping to see improvements around?
We really wanted to see improvements with yeast flares and yeast regressions, because that's heart-wrenching to watch your child keep sliding away. You get all this development and then it's gone. So that was one thing. We were really hoping to have the sensory processing with food improve. Just sensory processing in general. I couldn't
Right.
get him to wear a coat even though it's cold and snows here. So I mean, there was just lots of issues with that. Those were the 2 main things we were really focused on and
Right.
hoping
And
for.
and how about digestion, bowel movements, that sort of
Yes.
thing?
Oh, and constipation. That was, I felt like the poop police, for
Right.
lack of a better term. I'm always watching his diet to make sure he had enough fiber. Like I eventually got it to where he could have 1 bowel movement a day, but it was a lot of work to make sure that happened.
Right, right. And and then how did you sort of learn about FMT and eventually our work?
I stumbled upon some research, and then I started looking at Dr. Adams at ASU, who's doing the studies. And I actually had us booked with a place in the Bahamas, another clinic, and I had met parents who had taken their children. And then I realized they weren't answering all my questions. I wasn't, I wanted more donor information. The price wasn't right. It was pretty high for what they were offering. And then I had met someone who had gone to see you. I'd met Lindsay, and she told me all about you, and you were able to answer the questions I had that nobody else was answering.
Ah, I remember this part of our conversation now, so long ago. And you asked me at that point, is it okay if I share about my experience,
Yeah,
when we go through treatment and beyond?
yeah,
And I said, sure, I don't see any reason why you can't do that. I mean,
yeah,
freedom of speech and all that sort of thing. And I
yeah.
think that sort of flipped it for you. But
It did.
yes, that does ring a bell. And for you, then, in sort of, I mean, you'd already committed to the idea of doing FMT. Um,
Absolutely.
were there any like fears or things that you needed to overcome as a part of that decision making process, or did it just seem so logical for you, you were just like, head down, moving forward?
I think because I had dove so far down the rabbit hole with Dr. Adams, like anytime I could get my hands on anything he came out with online, I would just dive into that research. And I think I just felt totally confident going in because I too happy with what I would see the do-it-yourselfers online doing. Their results were a little more sketchy, but I knew we weren't going that route. We weren't doing it ourselves. We had guidance and donors that had been tested appropriately and thoroughly. So I felt comfortable.
Right. Good, good. And then, some people are having to spend a lot of effort in winning over family and partners
Yeah.
and the other things. So it's of course helpful when you're not in that camp.
Yeah.
Um, but nonetheless, I think that's an important factor, and something that's really important to us is making sure that parents and the patients, whoever they are, come into this very informed. And that's
Yes.
absolutely our experience. I mean, we've experienced criticism from outsiders about the fact that people are naive going
Yeah.
into this type of a therapy, and it's quite the contrary.
Yeah.
A little background on my history: I was not experienced in working with autism. I had years of experience in working with FMT, but it was
Yeah.
not for the kids with autism until that study came out. There
Uh,
was a 2-year follow up, and so I really didn't have a lot of experience. And there were many parents that I was meeting at the retreats where, sure, I have the title of doctor, but they knew a whole heck of a lot more than I did, especially about autism and the gut function and the immune function and everything else. Now, thankfully, a year and a half later, or a little over a year later of working almost exclusively with kids with autism, I've learned a lot,
yes.
part to the parents. But I think that's a huge factor, and that's for us a big thing as well. We want people to know everything. We want
Yeah.
them to be very informed, and they are. There's
Yeah.
no people that are like blindly walking into this, and that's important to me. And that's a part why we also, you know, I think, as we all know, across medicine, everybody can agree that early intervention is really important. And so it's awesome that you fought for that, even though your services were not perhaps the best they could be.
Yeah.
Early intervention is really, really important. But
Yeah.
we also want to make sure that parents understand what's going on. I mean, when you, especially if in your case, it was a little different, but when kids do experience a regressive autism, it's
Yeah.
kind of like, life's going on, it's everything's normal, and then boom, something happens, or a combination of several things happen, and then they
Yeah.
significantly regress. And I think, emotionally, it takes a lot to sort of digest that and become comfortable with this notion of, wait a
Yeah.
minute, I had a totally normal, healthy, developing child, and now something's happened and I've lost them. And I think there can be a sort of window, if you will, of emotionally coming to terms and accepting that as a
Yeah.
reality, similar
Yeah.
to many other things. I mean, patients with cancer go through a very similar thing where
Yeah.
they didn't have cancer, now they do, and it takes a while to accept the fact that that is their new reality. And so I
Yeah.
think for us, we definitely like to have parents have tried other things, gone through tried supplements or tried dietary changes to see
Yeah.
how far that can take them, because FMT is it's not a it's a very safe and very effective protocol, but who knows how far you could go with some other very easy and minimal interventions,
Yeah.
and that is just something that will help prepare them for the treatment to come at hand. But obviously, in
Yeah.
your case, it was a little different. You were aware very early on,
Yeah.
perhaps that within a few months, that something was different. And
Yes.
so yeah, and then for you, obviously, and you can talk a little bit, if you will, of your general experience in coming down to the treatment center, getting treatment, and then just your experiences during and now. I don't know, how long has it been since you've
And
finished?
I want to say about 10 months.
Okay.
Yeah, almost 10 months in a few days.
Okay.
So, I mean, we knew what to expect because we had people who had gone before us. I had friends who had gone before
Right.
us. So, and my husband is well traveled. So I know a lot of people that I speak to are nervous about traveling across the border.
Right.
But we felt like we were prepared. I mean, I didn't feel unprepared, I
Right.
guess. Um, it felt pretty streamlined. I don't know.
Okay, good. That's good. That's what we like to hear.
Yeah.
Many people have said to me, "This is so easy." It's just like
Yeah.
everything is just worked out, and so that for that we're very happy.
Yeah.
But and that is a fear that people do have about
Yes.
traveling in a new country and whatnot. But I think from our experience, we've had a lot of families now come, and everybody's generally their experience is very positive. They might say, "Oh, my room is not quite up to my expectations" or something, but
Yeah.
that's a pretty minor concern. Um,
Yes.
so that's really great to hear. And then FMT itself, like during the period of the 4 months or so of treatment, what was your experience? Like, when did you start
Sure.
seeing that, wow, things are changing? And what were some of the obstacles and challenges as well that you had to experience during that time?
Sure. I want to say day 2 with the loading doses. Rex waved at the hotel security guard, and that's when we knew there was a shift because, well, and coming off the vancomycin before treatment, we lost Rex a little bit, because you get a lot of gains with vancomycin typically. And so it was hard watching him kind of transition off of that to get ready for FMT doses. But the second day he waved at the security guard, and he had never, ever, like I could ask him to do it and he would be delayed and kind of do it or maybe do it. But she waved at him and he waved back, and
Wow.
like wildly waved back. And I
Wow.
just started crying. I was behind, his dad was holding him over his shoulder and Rex is waving, and I'm looking and I'm like, get in the elevator and just start bawling my eyes out.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I knew that was the start. I knew that things were going to shift.
Wow.
And when we got home, it got a little rough just because of the transition. So I want to say about 10 weeks, Rex was pretty hyper. Sleep was a struggle. I was pretty stressed because it felt like a yeast regression, like a yeast flare
Right.
regression. My PTSD is real. I know I sent you a frantic email. I sent my mama group online a frantic email. Like, I'm just like, what do I do? So, but then after 10 weeks, he seemed to simmer down and kind of come into himself again. But during that 10 weeks of crazy, there was still development. He started to wear a jacket. I could never get him to wear a coat, and he wore his coat. He started to drink green smoothies. That, like, what the heck? Like, just seeing the color green would set him off, and
Wow.
I could get him to drink green smoothies with no fruit, no sweetener. Like,
Wow.
so it was pretty amazing the gains we had, even though it was rough.
Right.
So, and then he just kept getting better from there. So we did have another regression. We had a yeast flare that came up. He was eating so many new things that I started to give him fruit, and he wasn't ready for fruit. But I got that under control. But that's the cool thing too with the FMT. It feels like yeast flares are more controllable. I couldn't control them before. I was like frantically doing antifungals and probiotics, and now we can't do those things because of
Right.
the treatment. And it seems like I can control this a lot better with the food.
That's great. And
So
do you find that the frequency of flares or the severity of them has changed?
yes, it's much less, much less.
Great.
So
And
we
that's
did
some
have go ahead.
Yeah, and that's something that we've seen a lot where we have some kids that are literally on full-time antifungals, like prescriptions,
Mhm.
and in a
Yeah.
lot of those cases, they're able to completely wean off of them, which is really significant.
Yeah, that's huge. So we did have another regression, but it was, and of course I panicked. But we ran it. That was about the 7 month mark, and I ran a bunch of labs, and we realized we had mold. So we had his mycotoxin lab came back looking pretty bad. So we remediated. I can't say that word. Remediated for mold,
Right?
and he's been on the up ever since.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's really wonderful. And
yes,
and then so sort of to contrast from some of the sort of symptoms or challenges that you had before,
uh-huh.
you mentioned the sensory part. Do you see that in other areas? I mean, you mentioned the jacket, but is there any other changes regarding the sensory component?
Some of I think so with after FMT, he's become more aware of his surroundings. So I feel like some of his issues have increased while other ones have decreased.
Mm,
So like sensory to sound it has become an issue again, and it wasn't before. But I just think because he's overly aware of his surroundings right now, he's just trying to adjust.
right. Very
So
interesting.
I
And when you say aware of the surroundings, like, do you mean like the social surroundings, like people, and like how do you?
everything. Everything. Like I know when we go to the grocery store, he never once asked for candy. He didn't even seem like we didn't ever feed him candy, but it didn't seem like he even knew it was there. And I mean, he's in the middle of the grocery store now, just total screaming fest on the floor over a bag of gummy bears. And I'm like cheering.
Right,
Like everyone's staring at me like I should be embarrassed or mortified. And I'm like
right,
cheering. I'm like, he notices the gummy bears.
right,
Oh my gosh.
right,
So he just like he notices everything now, like the radio being on, he doesn't want it on. He's just now starting to dance to music. He was not, he's starting to warm up to it just
right,
now.
right.
So, but yeah, he's just so aware.
Wow. And have you seen his like interactions with others, either kids or adults, change at all?
Yes, he wants to engage. We were at the splash park, and he walked up to a little boy and started talk. I know I did an Instagram post on it. He started talking to a little boy and held his hand, and they walked. And you could see, I couldn't hear what they were saying because they were far away, but you could see Rex's hand being expressive while he's talking. And it was one of the most beautiful moments of my entire life.
Wow, wow,
Yeah.
that's very, very special. And
Yes.
how about language, speech?
Explosion, absolute explosion in speech.
Oh,
Before it was delayed answers. I could ask a question, but it was very, very delayed response. If I got a response, like on good days, I'd get a response. And then he's so articulate and using so many more words together, like full sentences. And now he's conversational, which is mind boggling. I have to shift. I have to adjust because I'm not used to having full conversations with him.
wow, wow.
Yeah,
That's mind blowing to think
it's
of where you
amazing.
come from. And then how about the digestive
Oh,
symptoms?
it's such a relief. I am no longer policing the bathroom. I mean, I naturally kind of look, like when
Right.
I can before he flushes, but I mean, we're twice a day right now.
Wow.
And I mean, after FMT, it was still a little rocky, like right after dosing. And then he became more regular, like once a day. And then it was like the most beautiful bowel movements you've ever seen, So I'm tempted to take pictures all the time because it's so perfect. It's like, is this real? And they just kept getting more and more perfect. And you're like, I don't know. It's autism parents can get
They
excited about this
understand. Yeah,
topic
they understand.
because we all know this. But yeah, it's now he goes once in the morning and once in the evening, and I couldn't be happier. And I'm not policing it. He's just going about eating his food and going to the bathroom.
Right. That's so cool. And I think,
Yeah.
and I've talked about this a lot. You've probably heard me talk about it, but when your child has been sort of developmentally delayed,
Yeah.
and now they kind of wake up, they become aware of their surroundings and things of that nature. And just to kind of comment on the freaking out about the candy thing and why someone should be excited about that is
Yeah.
because they're learning the things that normally a toddler would learn now. right?
Yes.
So they're kind of like, and it'll likely be expedited, right? They'll go through those learning phases much quicker than, say, if they were like a 2-year-old. I've got a 2-year-old, he's totally bananas. Um, and but everybody knows that that's kind of a normal thing for a 2-year-old to have a hissy fit about something that's really not significant.
Yeah.
Um, and so a lot of times we see these sort of developmental milestones coming into play
Yeah.
later on, and yeah, socially it's not a great thing to experience, and
Yeah.
people are like, why why is your 7-year-old like totally acting crazy? That's
Yeah.
something a toddler does, and might judge you for it, but as a parent you say, wow, they're developing this, they're moving along. And so
Yeah.
yeah, their social interactions and their other interactions would be quite different than a child their age, but they're moving through them, and they
Yes.
kind of go through those things. And that's, I think, what's important. And sort of to tie back to the very start of this conversation, you said that you believe that the body had its ability to heal itself. And
Yes.
that's, FMT is not some like magical therapy that like fixes that problem and that problem and that problem and that problem. Like, it really just allows the body to do what it knows to do. And so
Yes.
it's fixing a real foundational issue, which is a depleted microbiome. and
Yes.
and it helps to reduce inflammation, replenish the bacteria, so that digestion and absorption can work as it should. And
Yeah.
now that his sensory issues are reduced, especially around foods, you can
Mm.
actually get the good stuff in him. And now
Yeah.
that he's having those regular perfect bowel movements, as you've alluded to, we know he's digesting, we know he's absorbing. And that's too where, and I don't know if you notice this at all, but a lot of times parents will see that their color changes, their eyes seem brighter, or
Yeah.
they get higher, like taller, or put on a little weight, appropriate amounts of weight, right? Because a lot of kids
Yeah.
are undersized or underweight. And
Yeah.
so again, that's a very immediate sign. And then what we also see is that generally first the digestive symptoms come into line, and
Mhm.
then later on we start seeing the changes in their speech or their language or their attention span, and their a lot of these other factors that are more sort of brain related. But as everybody, or most, are aware, the gut
Yeah.
and the brain play a very intricate role. And if we can heal the foundation, which is the gut and the gut lining, then we can do that same thing in the brain, as long as we're removing any other obstacles, right? And the mold along your path was an obstacle to healing. That's since
Absolutely.
resolved, and you can now remove that as an obstacle, and the healing sort of train, if you will, can
Yes.
continue to chug along the tracks.
Exactly.
And I think it's important to, a lot of kids do sort of sail, if you will, through treatment. There's really no massive ups, there's no massive downs, and they just keep,
Yeah.
moving along and progressing. But then there's also some that don't, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's really important. And I hope you felt supported, both
Yeah.
through myself and our team, and the other families, which I think is really, really important to know, that you have someone to reach out to get the support that you need. And I've seen the sort of freakouts enough now to just say,
Yeah.
calm down, it's going to be okay. Just, here's some strategies to,
Lots of
correct
freak outs.
and move forward. But,
Yeah.
and then since then, parents like yourself and many others have stepped into that role of saying, hey, this is quite normal.
Yeah.
Things do get better.
Yeah.
And I think too, that's great, to bring attention to the point that just because you stop FMT doesn't mean that the benefits should all go away, right? Like your
Right.
experience with the supplements, you lost a lot of those great improvements that you had seen. This is a
Yeah.
great thing. If you correct the foundation and you allow that to continue to grow and improve, then there's really no reason that you should have to, see any kind of a regression. And the benefits should keep coming because
Yeah.
we have proper digestion and absorption, the
Yes.
right composition and balance of bacteria that manages inflammation and overgrowth. And then the real healing can happen. And then the other therapies, like the speech and the OT and all the other things, would just be supportive, right? The neurological, or
Yes.
the different things that you had been doing and are
Yeah.
continuing to do, are now supportive in his development.
Yeah.
So really, really wonderful. And I know that Rex is in really great hands with you and your husband as his parents, because I know you're so supportive of that development. I can just see it in your calendar behind you. Uh, he's learning all of the seasons and the days. But
Yeah.
again, thank you so much for your time. Anything that you would like to say to any other parents or people who are watching this considering FMT or otherwise?
I just said it's been one of our biggest game changers, and it's not a smooth path after you do it. I think everybody is looking for that silver bullet or that magic one one dose or one hit fix to help our children recover, and that don't expect that, but know that this is a pretty magical experience, that you're going to have a lot of gains and everything becomes a lot easier.
Well, that's wonderful. I
Yeah.
appreciate it again, and thank you so much for sharing your message. You guys are really little celebrities. If you'd like, you can add your where people can find you if you'd like to expand your audience at all.
Okay. Sounds good. It's Life with T-Rex and Autism, and you can find us on Instagram or Facebook.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, and I am one of your fans as well. I
Thank
follow
you.
along, and I love to see the updates. It's really,
Okay.
it reminds me to keep plodding forward and supporting other parents like yourselves. So thanks for sharing the message today, and as you always do on Instagram, you have to be very talented at it. So keep it up.
Thanks for all your help, Dr. Club.
Yes.